You know that feeling like when you're just lying in bed?
Oh, with the screen glare?
Yeah, exactly. The screen glare is just illuminating your face, and you're watching a video of someone whose life just appears completely flawlessly optimized.
Right, the whole 4:30 a.m. wake-up crowd.
Yes. They wake up without an alarm. They meditate in this like perfectly lit room, drink some nutrient-dense green smoothie, and then they effortlessly switch between three languages before, navigating every social interaction with absolute grace.
It is exhausting just watching it.
It really is. You look at that and then you look around your own messy bedroom and this massive wave of inadequacy just washes over you. Your immediate thought is, I need to completely overhaul my entire existence right this second.
Which is a uniquely modern kind of overwhelm, honestly.
Right. We feel this immense pressure to attain absolute perfection. And because being perfect feels totally impossible by like 8 a.m., we just end up doing nothing at all.
It's a really profound form of paralysis by analysis. I mean, the modern wellness and productivity spaces have set the bar so incredibly high for our daily routines
Yeah.
and our communication skills and personal growth. We inadvertently create this internal environment where failure is, well, it's the only guaranteed outcome.
Because we're comparing ourselves to a highlight reel.
Exactly. We are judging our unfiltered, messy reality against someone else's highly curated content.
Well, today we are going to systematically dismantle that exact feeling of paralysis. We have a seriously dense and fascinating stack of source material for this deep dive.
There is a lot to get through.
There really is. We're looking at the neurobiology of morning routines, the underlying mathematics of habit formation, the cognitive psychology of language learning, and the lost nuanced art of small talk.
Which is a wild mix, but it all connects perfectly.
It does. And our whole focus for this deep dive is really on getting deep into the material and just having an interesting conversation about it. The mission today is figuring out how to navigate all of this without burning out in the first 48 hours.
And the core theme that emerges when you synthesize all these diverse sources is actually incredibly liberating.
How so?
Well, you just have to let go of perfection entirely. The overarching mission here is to explore how shifting our focus away from those massive, flawless life overhauls and instead prioritizing these like microscopic, consistent actions can radically transform you.
Transform your baseline productivity.
Yeah, your productivity, your internal confidence, and ultimately how you actually connect with the world around you.
So we are trading aesthetic perfection for messy, real-world consistency. I love that. But before we get into like transforming life trajectories or mastering human connection, the sources are very clear on one thing.
The first domino?
Right. We have to look at the very first decision you make every single day, how you wake up. Okay, let's unpack this. The notes heavily emphasize the hidden dangers of the snooze button, which I have to admit is a habit I definitely struggle with.
It's so tempting in the moment.
It really is. But if I think about it structurally, hitting the snooze button is essentially like hitting the restart button on a computer right in the middle of its boot up sequence.
That is a great way to put it.
Right. The machine is trying to load its operating system, warming up the hardware, and you just pull the plug and say, start over. You crash the system, and when you finally are forced to wake up, everything is glitchy and loads slower.
What's fascinating here is the precise biological mechanism behind that computer analogy. Because when we sleep, we operate in roughly 90-minute cycles.
Right, moving from light sleep to deep sleep.
Exactly, down into slow-wave sleep and into REM. So if your alarm wakes you naturally at the end of a cycle, you feel relatively refreshed. But when you hit snooze, you're telling your brain to go back to sleep.
Which feels like what you need because you're tired.
But because you are exhausted, your brain often plunges straight back into a new sleep cycle, trying to reach that deep, slow-wave state again.
But you only have like 9 minutes before the alarm goes off again.
Which is exactly the trap. The alarm violently rips you out of the beginning stages of deep sleep, and this forceful disruption leaves these high levels of sleep-inducing neurochemicals just floating around in your brain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it induces a clinical state called sleep inertia. Your brain is chemically confused about whether it's supposed to be awake or unconscious.
So that heavy cognitive fog isn't just you being grumpy.
No, it's a real impairment. And it isn't just a brief annoyance. It can impair your executive function for up to 4 hours. You are actively making yourself more exhausted by trying to extract 9 more minutes of rest.
So the very act of trying to comfort ourselves with extra sleep is what completely sabotages the cognitive load of the entire morning. That is wild.
It really is.
So the first microscopic action has to be getting up immediately. But the source material gets highly specific about the biological levers we need to pull right after that, which are light and water.
And to be clear, this isn't about adopting some complex 40-step wellness routine. This is just basic human physiology.
Right.
After sleeping for 7 or 8 hours, you are severely dehydrated simply from the act of respiration. You exhale moisture all night.
You just dry yourself out by breathing.
Exactly. And your brain, which requires immense hydration to fire neurons efficiently, is practically parched by morning. So a large glass of water right away is just a non-negotiable biological requirement.
And then the light component follows that.
Yeah. Opening your windows or stepping outside to get natural sunlight into your eyes acts as an evolutionary switch.
I read that the lux levels of natural sunlight hitting your retina send a direct signal to the brain.
Specifically to the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
Right. And that immediately halts the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for sleepiness.
It literally flips the biological switch from recovery mode to action mode.
But there is a modern habit the sources explicitly warn against during this awakening window. They mandate a strict 30-minute phone ban upon waking.
Oh, this is so crucial. Checking a device right away fundamentally alters your neurochemistry for the rest of the day.
Because of the stress?
Partly, yes. If the first thing you process is an urgent work email or some polarized news headline, you are instantly spiking your cortisol.
Your primary stress hormone.
Right, before you've even fully booted up. Conversely, if you are scrolling through short-form social media videos, you are artificially flooding your brain with cheap dopamine.
So I'm trying to visualize that. You're setting your brain's baseline for stimulation at an artificially high peak right out of the gate.
Yes. You are essentially creating a dopamine deficit state for the remainder of the day. Because you spiked it so high at 7 a.m., everything else you need to do feels boring.
Like reading a dense report or having a normal conversation.
Exactly. Or doing focused work. It all feels incredibly understimulating by comparison.
Yeah.
You've effectively eroded your own capacity for sustained attention before you even left the house.
Wow. So instead of hijacking our dopamine with a screen, the sources suggest something called the 5-minute rule. Doing an incredibly small physical task to create momentum.
Like making the bed. Or doing a light stretch.
Emptying the dishwasher. But I mean, on the surface, that feels almost absurdly trivial.
Well, the triviality is the point. Making your bed isn't about having a tidy room. It's about engineering a micro win.
A micro win.
Yeah. You complete a defined task, and your brain registers a small, natural, earned release of dopamine. You build immediate internal trust.
Like you establish a baseline of energetic momentum.
Exactly. You prove to your subconscious that you are capable of executing an intention.
I understand the neurochemistry of a micro win, I really do.
Yeah.
But I have to challenge this premise based on just, well, human nature.
Okay, go for it.
In a culture optimized for instant gratification, where we all want to see massive transformations overnight, isn't a tiny adjustment like making the bed like a 1% improvement? Isn't that just too imperceptible for the human brain to stay motivated by?
In the immediate short term, yes. Our brains struggle to value a 1% change because the daily delta is basically invisible. You can't see the difference.
Exactly.
But that is where the mathematics of micro changes completely upends our intuitive thinking. The sources dive deeply into the compound effect, specifically the 1% rule.
The idea that it builds on itself.
Right. Mathematically, if you improve by just 1% every single day, you don't end up simply a few percentage points better.
Because compound interest acts on the new, slightly larger baseline every day?
Yes. You actually become 37 times better by the end of a single year.
Wait, 37 times? That is massive.
It is. When you frame it as mathematical certainty rather than just motivational rhetoric, it shifts the entire paradigm.
You stop thinking, I need to become perfectly fluent in Spanish this week.
And you start thinking, I just need to learn 3 vocabulary words today.
We systematically underestimate what we can accomplish in a year, largely because we vastly overestimate what we can force ourselves to do in a single day.
That is exactly right. And to ensure these 1% changes actually survive our daily lack of motivation, the sources outline a structural concept called habit stacking.
Right. Instead of trying to carve out a brand new isolated block of time for a new behavior, you attach it to an established anchor.
Yes. So, for instance, deciding, after I turn on the coffee maker, I will stretch my hamstrings for 2 minutes.
The coffee maker is the anchor.
Right. The neural pathway for making your morning coffee is already incredibly thick and efficient in your brain. It requires zero cognitive effort.
So by stacking the new habit immediately alongside it, you are hitching a ride on that existing neural superhighway.
Precisely. But the absolute most crucial element the sources emphasize for maintaining these habits isn't willpower.
It's environment design.
Yes,
Hmm.
we harbor this cultural myth that highly successful people possess superhuman discipline.
Right, that they're just built
But
differently.
they rarely are. They simply design their physical spaces so that discipline is entirely unnecessary.
So if you want to read more, you don't rely on motivation. You literally place a book on your pillow in the morning, so you have to physically move it to go to sleep.
Exactly. Or if you want to stop mindlessly watching television, you don't just tell yourself to stop.
You take the batteries out of the remote and put them in a drawer in the kitchen.
You are manipulating friction.
But why is friction, just the act of walking to the kitchen for batteries, why is that enough to stop a habit we actually kind of want to do?
Because evolutionary biology dictates that our brains are incredibly conservative with energy. For millions of years, conserving calories was the difference between life and death on the savannah.
Oh, wow. So we're wired to take the easy route.
Exactly. Our brains evolved to be fundamentally lazy, always seeking the path of least physical and cognitive resistance.
So by manipulating your surroundings, you are outsmarting your own evolutionary programming.
Right. If the productive choice is the easiest choice in the room, you bypass the prefrontal cortex's need to exert willpower entirely.
But even with a flawlessly engineered environment, human error is inevitable. We are going to sleep through an alarm or eat the junk food or skip the workout at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Which introduces a vital concept from the sources for long-term resilience, which is the two-day rule.
Okay, what is that?
The framework is straightforward. Missing one day is an unavoidable accident of life. But missing 2 days in a row is the neurobiological start of a new negative habit.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the psychology of that. Doesn't the two-day rule inherently create a massive pressure cooker situation?
How do you mean?
Well, if I miss Monday, now Tuesday becomes this high-stakes, stressful event where I absolutely cannot fail, or I've ruined the whole system.
Ah, I see. That is a very real risk if you view habits purely as a streak to be maintained, like a high score in a video game. But the sources reframe this around identity rather than perfection. The first miss is met with complete self-compassion. You acknowledge that life happens.
Okay.
The focus on the second day isn't about achieving a flawless performance. It is simply about casting a vote for the type of person you want to be.
So even if you only do 2 minutes of a workout on Tuesday, you preserve the identity of someone who works out.
Exactly. You protect the habit loop from decaying.
We are essentially removing the physical friction to make good choices and navigating the mental friction when we inevitably stumble. But what happens when the friction isn't just about getting to the gym?
Like what?
Well, what happens when the friction is entirely internal because the notes transition into the immense psychological barriers we face when learning a complex new skill, relying heavily on the psychology of language learning as a prime example?
Oh, this part is fascinating. The mechanics of physical habits and psychological habits mirror each other perfectly. Just as physical friction stops us from picking up a book, mental friction, which most often manifests as a hypercritical inner voice, paralyzes us from communicating.
Right. The fear of making a grammatical mistake or sounding foolish triggers a genuine threat response in the brain.
It does.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources introduce a philosophy called connection over perfection.
Yes, I love this concept.
They point out a fascinating cognitive reality. Native speakers do not mentally process your small grammar mistakes the way you think they do. The ultimate biological goal of language is semantic transfer, like sharing meaning, not passing a syntactic exam.
Consider how you process your own native language. If someone learning it approaches you and uses the wrong verb tense, your brain's language centers don't just crash.
Right, you don't panic.
Exactly. Your cognitive load focuses entirely on context and intent. You're listening for the underlying meaning to bridge the gap, and that exact same cognitive grace is extended to you by native speakers when you are the one learning.
The sources specifically tackle what they call the accent myth. So many learners are paralyzed by their accent, viewing it as this glaring neon sign of their inadequacy.
It's a huge mental block for people.
But the text argues that an accent is literal auditory proof of neuroplasticity. It proves your brain has the capacity to hold multiple linguistic frameworks.
It is a marker of intelligence, not a deficit.
Yes.
But While that reframe is logically sound, logic rarely de-escalates a heightened nervous system in the middle of an actual conversation.
Very true. When you're nervous, logic goes out the window.
Right. That is why the sources advocate for concrete, microscopic habits for solo practice to build neurological confidence. They highlight a technique called shadowing.
Shadowing, that's listening to native audio and repeating it a fraction of a second later, right?
Yes, and doing this while physically looking at yourself in the mirror.
The mirror technique completely shifts the paradigm for me because practicing pronunciation in the mirror is literally a physical workout. You are training the motor cortex and the specific muscles of your jaw, tongue, and diaphragm the exact same way a sprinter trains their fast-twitch muscle fibers.
It is muscle memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you view it as physical therapy for your speech mechanics, it removes the emotional weight. You aren't failing at speaking, you are just doing necessary physical reps to build that muscle memory.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what is fundamentally happening during that mirror practice? You are aggressively rewiring your internal monologue
You are shifting from a fixed mindset, like I sound foolish, my accent is terrible,
to an active growth mindset, which is I am mechanically training my body to produce new sounds.
I am synthesizing this, and it seems like it all comes down to where we place our attention.
What do you mean?
Well, if I am terrified of my accent, my attention is entirely focused inward, on my own ego. How do I sound? What do they think of me? But if I shift my goal strictly to utility, just transferring a thought from my brain to theirs, am I essentially making the other person's understanding the priority instead of my own pride?
That is the profound psychological shift right there. Ego versus utility. When your objective is flawless performance, any mistake is a threat to your ego.
Right.
But when your objective is human connection, an awkward, grammatically incorrect sentence that still manages to convey your point is a massive victory.
Yeah.
It neutralizes the fear of failure because the standard of success is no longer perfection.
It is simply being understood,
Exactly.
which equips us for the final and perhaps most intimidating frontier in these notes. Once we have optimized our mornings, engineered our environment for 1% habits, and silenced our ego to prioritize connection, we have to take all of that out into the physical world.
We have to interact with strangers.
Right. The universally dreaded realm of small talk.
It terrifies so many people.
So what does this all mean when you are actually in the trenches? Picture being stuck in an elevator with a new colleague or attending an industry networking event where you know absolutely no one. The silence is thick and suffocating.
It's the worst feeling.
It is. Your amygdala is firing, telling you to say something incredibly insightful, but your prefrontal cortex just entirely blanks out.
It is a classic evolutionary stress response. But this raises an important question. What do we fundamentally misunderstand about the purpose of small talk?
Because people often despise it.
Right, they view it as shallow data transfer. They think talking about the rain is a waste of my cognitive energy. But the sources explain that small talk serves an entirely different evolutionary function. It is a social bridge.
A social bridge. So it's not actually about the barometric pressure or the traffic. It is an auditory signal communicating, I am a safe, friendly member of the tribe, and I am open to cooperative interaction.
Exactly. It de-escalates the threat response in the other person's brain. That is why the sources emphasize starting with highly observable, low-stakes topics.
Like the weather.
The weather, the catering at an event, or just the architecture of the room. You are simply pinging the other person's social radar to see if they are receptive to engagement.
But the terror sets in when you ask about the catering, and they say, yes, it's good, and then the silence immediately returns.
The dreaded dead end.
Yes. This is where the notes provide what I view as an absolute cognitive lifesaver, the FORD method. It is an acronym that acts as a mental parachute when your brain freezes.
FORD.
Exactly. Family, occupation, recreation, and dreams.
It relies on the psychological reality that almost every human being on the planet is actively engaged in, or at least has an opinion about, at least one of those 4 pillars.
The topics themselves are common sense, but the sources emphasize that the execution is everything. If you just rapidly cycle through the acronym like, where do you work? What are your hobbies? What are your dreams? You sound like an interrogator.
You do. The brilliance of the S&R method relies entirely on a secondary skill, which is active listening through open-ended inquiry. When we are nervous, we tend to ask closed questions that lead to dead-end yes or no answers because they are cognitively easier to formulate.
Like, did you enjoy your weekend?
Exactly. To build a social bridge, you must deliberately start your inquiries with why, how, or what. What was the highlight of your weekend?
You are forcing them out of a binary response and into a narrative response. You are asking them to tell a story.
And if we analyze the neurobiology of that interaction, asking open-ended questions is an incredibly powerful tool for connection. When you ask someone how or why, you are doing far more than filling dead air. You are providing them with a platform.
Because people love to be heard.
Exactly. Human beings have a deep-seated psychological need to feel competent and interesting. When you hand them the conversational microphone, you stimulate the reward centers in their brain. They literally get a dopamine release from being listened to attentively.
Wah.
And the strategic advantage for you, it requires minimal cognitive exertion on your part. You merely have to be genuinely curious and listen.
You make the other person feel incredibly valued, their threat response lowers, and you barely had to speak. It is a fascinating application of human psychology.
It really changes the whole dynamic of a room.
It does. When we zoom out and look at the trajectory of this entire deep dive, the causality is striking. It all begins with mastering that initial physical friction.
Refusing to hit the snooze button.
Right, and avoiding the dopamine trap of the morning phone scroll. That neurochemical baseline gives you the clarity to build tiny 1% habits through intelligent environment design.
And mastering that physical environment builds the internal trust required to tackle the mental environment.
Yes.
It gives you the resilience to reframe your inner critic, to practice in the mirror, and to realize that whether you are learning a language or meeting a stranger, the goal is utility and connection, never perfection.
Which empowers you to step into an elevator, deploy the F4D method, ask an open-ended question, and build a social bridge. It is an architecture for a deeply connected life, built entirely on microscopic, manageable actions. And to you listening right now, whether you are trying to rewire your morning neurochemistry, struggling through the messy middle of learning a new language, or just hoping to feel less anxious at your next social event, please internalize this. You do not need a flawless, heavily curated existence.
You really don't.
You just need to focus on the friction of the very next tiny action. Put the phone in the other room. Drink the water. Ask the how question.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, synthesizing all these mechanics. If we accept that environment design dictates our habits and that small, low-stakes questions dictate our social connections, how can you redesign your physical space today to guarantee just one low-stakes, positive interaction with a stranger?
Ooh, that is a fascinating challenge to take into the real world.
And reflecting on that computer reboot analogy from the very beginning, I urge you to ask yourself, what is the digital snooze button in your life right now? What is the comforting but destructive habit you keep hitting that crashes your system, depletes your dopamine, and forces you to hide from the friction of reality? Identify it, interrupt the cycle, and finally look up to engage with the complex, imperfect world around you.
Because waiting for perfection is just another form of paralysis. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.